And under the new regime with Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer, it's only going to get worse, because in complete defiance of the law, in complete defiance of the Court of Appeal, Yvette Cooper is now re-encouraging police to collect more non-crime hate incidents, not less. She's no interest at all in upholding Article 10. And I think this stems from Keir Starmer's instinct as a prosecutor. I mean, he's just got over telling the world and his wife that he's the son of a toolmaker. And he's now not missing a single opportunity to tell everybody that for a number of years he was director of public prosecutions, and that it's his instinct to prosecute, it's his instinct to lock people up, it's his instinct not to let them out, etc. Well, I think that is not the role of a prime minister. That is the role of a prosecutor. Now, this is important. I'll tell you why. In this country, we have an adversarial system, our judiciary. You have a prosecutor whose job it is to show that the other side are guilty in their actions, guilty in their minds, and to destroy any possible mitigation or defence. On the other side, of course, they've got a defence lawyer who tries to say either he didn't do it, or he didn't mean to do it, or if he did do it and he didn't mean to do it, these are the mitigating reasons why. Okay. What Starmer is doing, I think, is he is viewing the entire world, and certainly this country, through a prosecutor's eyes. So that there are the sheep who follow him, there are the sheep who agree with everything he says, or who certainly won't make a noise about it, and then there are goats. There are those who he categorised following the riots as evil. He just categorised them as evil. He knew their mindset. He was able to discern their mindset as being evil, and said there is no place for them. In other words, he was acting as a director of public prosecutions. He was telling us all that we were guilty, even though rioters hadn't been to court yet, even though in many cases they'd not been even questioned, yet let alone found guilty. He knew, and Yvette Cooper knew, the mindset of these people. He knew that they were engaged in a dangerous ideology, and he was absolutely certain that he was going to criminalise them one way or another and get them through the justice system as fast as possible and get them off the streets. That is the mind of a prosecutor. It is not the mindset of a prime minister. The job of a prime minister to not just look at the causes of crime, but to look at the causes of crime. Now, back in the old days of socialism, there was this concept of alienation, where if there were rioters out on the streets and people doing bad things, burning cars, throwing bricks, of course it was treated as crime, but there was at least an attempt to look at what was motivating these people. And there was this concept of alienation. People felt alienated from the wider society. I think Keir Starmer needs to get back to his socialist roots and start thinking about the fact that these riots did not happen in a vacuum. They happened because people feel alienated from the justice system. They feel alienated when they see innocent victims, like in Southport. But it's not just Southport, is it? It's over and over again. They feel alienated from that. They feel as though the state is letting them down and everybody else down. They feel alienated when there is uncontrolled immigration. They feel alienated when they walk into an NHS hospital, certainly south of the border, and find it populated by temporary staff, agency staff, many of whom can't speak English. They feel alienated. And I think that if Keir Starmer wants to be true to his socialist principles, he needs to begin to tackle this sense of alienation that many British people now feel, because that sense of alienation and the riots that we saw on the streets are, as far as I'm concerned, connected.
It's one of the hallmarks of socialism, though, or socialism in practice at least, is that the intellectual vanguard of socialism are only ever interested in a certain kind of alienation. They're always liable to dismiss other kinds. Connor, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think actually he is being true to his socialist roots in a certain regard, and his view of human nature as purely a product of education and economic circumstances. And so this is why he keeps discrediting the original alienating causes of the civil unrest that we saw recently. And again, we time and time again on this channel said, don't go down there, not only to not engage in criminal behavior, because we can't condone that, but also don't give the state, which already wants to crack down on you, an excuse to look for doing so. But he won't regard those as legitimate because he fundamentally believes that every single new arrival, even the most arch jihadian or imported miscreant, would be as British as you or I, peaceful, law-abiding, loving human rights, if not the far-right racists kept reminding them that they're all different. So all they need to do is censor them, chill them with non-crime hate incidents, and lock them up for the harshest possible periods, and then we'll all be singing Kumbaya and holding hands. I do think that's what's motivating that, and I think that's the same sort of thing that was motivating not just pure risk aversion, of course, on behalf of the police officers, but the same ideology that is motivating the College of Policing, the officers themselves. They just think if they put bigotry back in the closet, that everyone will just be egalitarian and all sing John Lennon's Imagine.
Yeah, I think you're wrong. I think that singing Kumbaya will always be viewed as a non-crime agent and not a crime. I think singing Allah Akbar will perhaps be celebrated, but certainly not Kumbaya. This is the problem with socialism, that it has a utopian ideal that has no bearing whatsoever on human nature. And so it's an effort to conform to the utopia. And if you don't make the effort, or don't at least act as though you're making the effort, and are seen to be making the effort, and put up the symbols and emblems and the flags of your efforts, then you're sent to the gulag. That's it. Nobody believes, I don't think, very few people believe in this LGBTQ plus nonsense. Nobody believes that human beings can change sex, or that there are 97 genders. No one does. But everybody is forced into pretending that they do as a sign of obedience to the state. That's it. And we see the flags everywhere. I travelled down to London this morning on a bloody LGBTQI plus painted train. It was only because you're so important, Connor, that I didn't refuse to get on it. So, but under old socialist regimes, under Stalin, under Mao, the reason that the portraits were everywhere, the reason that flags and colours were everywhere, the reason that there was chanting and a certain form of words that you had to repeat, was not because people believed it, but it was because the state needed to remind you that resistance is futile, that this is so all-pervading, that this ideology is everywhere, that this statism is so much bigger than you, and resistance by you and your little friends is completely and utterly futile. That's the overriding message of the flags, the symbols, the language, the multicoloured trains, the Pride months, the LGBTQI trans history months that we have. I mean, every single week, every single month, there's something to remind us that resistance is futile. And I think Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper are fully aware of this. I don't think they are left-wing, at all. I think they are the far right. I think the Starmer government is far right.
I would push back on the use of that phrase, because I think what they say to mean as far right is anyone whose culture, history, love of family, love of place and faith is indigestible in the multicultural melting pot. And so they see that as indistinguishable from the Nazis. I don't think those two are the case. I think you can be a British patriot without needing to don boots and goose step, but they clearly don't. I do think, as you are, they're delusional socialists or extreme progressive liberals. I think we should be precise about using that.
Well, I think that, people have a hissy fit when you point out that the National Socialist Party of Germany was a socialist party, and it was a socialist party with added bits of racism attached to it. I had an argument with someone the other day who said, the chief architect of privatization was Hitler. But what Hitler did, when his idea of privatization was pulling down the monopolies of the super large companies to put it back in the hands of much smaller companies. It's not the privatization that you and I talk about.
But where he goes from state to the individual.
Hitler's privatization was breaking up the large companies, the large monopolies, and handing it back to much smaller groups of people. The difference between socialism and National Socialism is so minute, it's simply not worth talking about.
I very strongly disagree with
As
that.
do I.
I think, I really do. Okay, so I think that there's a very, very key anthropological difference. They both share that utopian cast of mind that you were talking about earlier. But in the case of the Soviet communists of the last century and what I would want to call the sort of race communists of today, where they've sort of swapped out the proletariat for the kind of the third world global south, and that's their new proletariat as they see it. They are social engineers. They view themselves as engineering a social utopia by changing the educational system, by trying to they believe that they're fundamentally Rousseauian. They think that all problems in human life result from the institutions that men have made for themselves, and that therefore what we need to do is re-engineer those institutions, and then human nature will blossom in the way that it has been hindered from blossoming by the institutions as they are in their corrupted form. The Nazis were biological utopians. They, for example, technically, even though the socialists, the communists in Russia would be very happy to persecute kulaks and to hang them from the trees, because these were the successful peasants who were sort of holding back the dream of egalitarianism in the countryside. They would obviously commit those atrocities, but at their fundamental anthropology, there was no reason for the socialists to think that a kulak couldn't reform himself, possibly, if he really.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. But
in the Nazi case, that was not the case with what they regarded as Volksfremde, these people who were alien elements who could not be redeemed. There was still. This is, I think, why Nazism strikes us as more wrong, because the defective elements on Nazi criteria cannot be reformed. They cannot be re-engineered. They just need to be exterminated. Whereas in the socialist case, you are at least provisionally given given an ability to get with the new program.
I think, again,
you're only killed off if you don't.
Again, academically, theoretically, you're correct. But practically, biological essentialism and structural essentialism have exactly the same result. Because you can look at the death counts under Hitler, and then you can look at the death count under Mao and under Stalin, etc. And you tell me the difference, the practical difference. I don't see a practical difference. When it comes to the practical outworkings of a state, I don't think it matters at all whether it is a committed socialist state or a committed far-right state. I think the chances of you dying and being suppressed under that system are equal, or one may be worse than the other.
Yes, I'm certainly in no mood to defend 20th century totalitarianism, whether it takes a social form or a biological form. But this is why one of the things as well, so as well as that potentially quite tedious theoretical gloss I gave on National Socialism as compared with Soviet communism, it's also important not to play into the language games that our opponents like to set up for us. And if we're constantly entrenching in the public discourse this idea that the far right is this boogeyman, that we're constantly surrendering the language game to the left as well, which is also something which I wouldn't want to do. I would want to try and mainstream a term like race communist to describe these people, rather than fall back on the far right language. I think it's also tactically more defensible as well as theoretically more defensible.
Yeah, I just think I don't understand why it is that you can wander around with a Chairman Mao T-shirt on.
Yes,
no problem at all. You can wander around with a Stalin T-shirt on at all. You can't even buy a Hitler T-shirt off Amazon, because I've tried. And the reason that I've tried is because,
to find out if this double standard exists.
I wanted to run an experiment where I walked into a pub, the same pub, one day wearing a Mao T-shirt, one day wearing a Stalin T-shirt, one day wearing a Hitler T-shirt. I was going to conduct a social experiment to see what the reaction was.
Yes.
Couldn't do it because I'm getting a Hitler T-shirt. But I had no problem at all getting a Mao T-shirt and a Stalin T-shirt and what have you. Why is that? You talk about the re-engineering of society and the re-engineering of language. Why is it that Stalin and Mao and Pot are not synonymous with evil in exactly the same way that Hitler is? And that's why I say, from a practical outworking, if you're a member of the proletariat, then it may be that under one regime you're more at risk by dint of your colour or your religion or whether you're circumcised or not. Under another regime, it may be that you're more at risk because you happen to be a farmer or you happen to have a parent who liked Beethoven. and you're viewed as dangerously bourgeois. From a practical point of view, I see no difference at all. And that's why I think it's absolutely right. Or, you can call this current government either far left or far right. I'm quite happy to use either term, in all honesty, because I think it makes no difference whatsoever.
I do think far left is more accurate, but I think we are all in agreement that the irony of accusing you of being on the precipice of a transgenocide for tweeting out a lyric is that ultimately, ineluctably, their designation of their critics as class enemies is a genocidal ideology.
It is.
And I don't think it's too extreme to say that this government, were they not constrained by various outward overtures to human rights, would see no problems mass imprisoning and allowing to die off their political opponents. So I think you're absolutely right on that.